Welcome to the Sage Family Podcast, where we explore natural homeschooling, gentle parenting,
simple living, and family adventure.
I'm Rachel Rainbolt, the Sage Family Mentor, coming to you from an island in the Pacific Northwest, where I live wild and free in connection with my hilarious husband and 3 growing sailors in our fixer-upper on the beach. So join us around the campfire and let's get living the family life of our dreams. This is episode 95, and today I'm here with Magdalena Garcia talking about ceremony. Magdalena is a mother, educator, writer, birth story listener, parenting coach, and ceremony facilitator. She combines her own experience of motherhood with a master's in education, a bachelor's in psychology, and 25 years working in schools serving hundreds of children and their families to help parents create, nurture, and repair their relationships with their children. She is a highly trained listener as both a certified hand-in-hand parenting instructor and a trained birth story listener. She has a special interest in how the use of metaphor, image tending, art making, rituals, ceremony, and our relationship with the non-human world can help us prepare for, navigate, recover from, and integrate the emotionally challenging thresholds we encounter in becoming parents and over again as our children develop. This conversation with Magdalena actually has a lot of visual value, so I strongly recommend watching it, which you can do alongside an inspiring and supportive community of mothers inside the Sage Family Village at sagefamily.com/village. All right, welcome to the show, Magdalena.
Hi, Rachel. Glad to be here.
Will you introduce yourself and share a bit about who you are and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, well, my name is Magdalena Garcia, and I'm really glad. First of all, I just want to say just hello, and to everyone who will be listening, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Glad to be here with you and sharing this really special topic. I'm currently in Los Angeles, California. I'm originally from New Mexico. And as I sit here with you today, this afternoon, I'm sitting with you as a mother of 19 years. My daughter's actually about to turn 17, so that's very exciting. And I'm also a mother to her sisters who we lost in utero at 6 months and 6 weeks. So in honor of all of what it has taken me to come to this point in becoming a mother, good afternoon. And I also bring to you my daughterness. I'm the daughter of Maria Adela and the granddaughter of Carmel and the great-granddaughter of Romana. And all of that legacy is in me and joins me today as we talk about what it means to really honor all the parts of us and how to use different kinds of tools in order to do that.
That might be the most beautiful introduction we have ever had on this podcast. I feel so good. I feel my soul just settled in and felt so safe and seen and cozy, even just with your intro. So thank you for that. I'm even more excited to jump into this conversation than I was previously. So here we go. We're here today to talk about ceremony, traditions, rituals, sort of creating those as a family. And a great many parents have chosen to step away from the religions of their childhood. And in so doing, have lost a lot of that public ceremony and ritual around transitions that came with it. How can we reclaim this beneficial component and make it ours in a way that aligns with our current values?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And, I've been thinking about it personally for my own life over these 17 years that I have this little person in front of me. And I wonder if we want to pause for a second and just even talk about what ceremony and ritual is. Because people might, I know that I have certain ideas, and I know that other people might be coming with other ideas. But based on my experience for myself and based on the experience of working with other people, ceremony is the container. It's the time and the place. And when we think about stepping away from religion and we step away from indigenous practices and wisdom traditions, ceremony is the point in time when we all know it's time to stop. Mm-hmm. Stop the 10,000 things of life and honor something or someone. So ceremony is the time and the place, and ritual, those are the elements within ceremony that get us deeper, that actually encourage us to pause and find meaning. So the elements of ritual, things like symbolism, the activation of the senses, right? There's candles, there's certain clothing, there's things we smell, there's things we taste. All of those things get us to here now, which then helps us with the other element, which is what's the story? The story underneath the story, right?
Oh, that is all so beautiful. Goodness.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even want to speak because I'm just like digesting it all. As you're talking, I'm thinking about how like my background is in therapy, and a lot of therapists whom I adore, friends, we often have sort of like we light a candle when we sit down and come into this space, like to connect with another person. And there are often like things we'll say or, different like sort of rituals that we'll move through to mark the transition, like out of our personal space and into this like safe space of connection with this separate soul. And then when it ends too, a lot of that, like really for our like health and well-being, sort of having those where like we blow out the candle or we, whatever the things are. And I know that's not exactly what we're talking about here, but that is something that was coming to mind for me.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you talked about that, because that is, as I talk with people about ceremony and ritual, people are like, but how do you do it? How do you do it? We know how to do it. This is in our DNA. The majority of our experience, our legacy as humans has been in doing things like that. Mm. So the lighting of the candle, it seems silly or insignificant, rather. Insignificant is the better word. It seems insignificant, but that orients you in that moment to something. And as humans, fire is very sacred. So suddenly we bring that element in, and something about us reorganizes and drops into the space in a way that we might not do otherwise. So that idea of the using the elements, fire, water, air, earth, those things I think come kind of naturally to us. Like I have this plant here that my new friend, I just got her, and I just needed this grounding, this friend to be here with me. That's that tie to the non-human world as well, where we can get lots of resourcing and gets us into the moment, which kind of going back to that idea of like the story underneath the story, like we're here to gather, to talk, but there's something else happening here. There's a deeper intention and there's a deeper connection that if we can slow our bodies enough with assistance, right, with these devices in a way, right? I put on my pretty shirt, haven't worn this shirt, right? Yeah, we have our
like tea. I have my,
exactly, in my favorite cup, my new cup that my friend gave me. All these things just keep orienting us to arrive here and arrive here. We get to like who's in there and what wants to be spoken and shared. And that's, to me, what ceremony is: the container, ritual or the elements, and religion and indigenous practices and public institutions are typically the places that do that for us, right? We have our religious traditions, and then we've got things for school, right? Graduations, all of those big those big moments. But what can happen is that not all the ritual elements are invoked in some of those things, which includes meaningful participation. Mm. So we are left, we go to a wedding and like, wow, what we remember is the dress. Mm-hmm. And what we remember is the cake. The vows were just like something to get through, right? Which is kind of the most important part. So when we think about how we can meaningfully participate in whatever's happening, then we begin to drop even further. And then this tool can work on us.
There's this, like I said, like with the candle, like there's so many things that seem insignificant, and yet, and I'm sort of this like geeky, like logical research. I have that part of my brain, right? That tends to like show up when I put the professional hat on. And yet there's this like ritual ceremony. It seems to tap into something deeper that is I'm just as confident in my knowing around, even if I don't have like a, white man written textbook to validate it for me, this feels like a survival level, like need like a basic sense of belonging and connection with the earth and with people. It feels that central, like a strand woven into the fabric of my humanity in a way that is sometimes challenging to articulate through that very like logical lens. And yet it feels just as important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was just even noticing as you were talking, this like the strand weaving, the symbolism of this strand that connects you to legacy. It connects you to a time and place before you, and it connects you to a time and place and people beyond you. And this, you even did this, like, this is like, the flow of life, that we do know how to do this. And there is this current running through us of a desire to make meaning. Mm-hmm. And as I think about then as parents, like the social and the developmental transitions that our children experience, right? The social transitions of going to kindergarten, going to middle school, going to high school, graduating, right? First sleepover, learning to drive, first tooth, weaning, giving away baby stuff. These are all transitions. We can use the fancy word of thresholds, right? You're standing at the doorway. I'm about to cross through into something else. I'm about to be initiated. Right. And initiation is, and as parents, we are initiated over and over and over. And initiation is, I was one way before, and because this thing happened, I am different.
Oh, this is so profound. I feel like the timing is so good for me too, because I'm reflecting on like all of these moments, all of these thresholds that I've passed over in the past, but also like I recently turned 40 and I'm feeling a real like matrescence, but like I need a word for that in this season of life. My oldest is 18. So there's this like mirroring of like shifting into this new season. And so I've really been trying to feel out, like this feels profound. It feels big. And it's feels invisible. Like there's, much like matrescence is like, there is some celebration of that, whether it's like a baptism where people are excited that, you announce your baby or whatever. But then like, particularly for women, particularly later, a lot of that becomes invisible. So a lot of this has been sort of like weighing on me in this season.
Yeah, I 100% feel you and am right there in with you. And I'm thinking about your last guest that talked about emotional labor and the what we're doing, how we are. You said you wanted a word for like what happens now as your child is turning 18 and you are 40, you're on your way to menopause, right? This passage, this life passage. And that's what matrescence is. And that's why, this feeling of it being invisible, it ties to the emotional labor, right?
Yeah.
What is matrescence? Matrescence, can we pause for a
Yes,
second?
yes.
So matrescence is a word that has been revived by Aurelia Fan, who is a clinical psychologist and a faculty member at Columbia. And she's revived it from Dana Raphael. I want to give credit to the lineage, who was a medical anthropologist back in the 70s and a breastfeeding advocate. And the idea was, how do we talk about exactly what you're talking about? That the baby pops out and we are mother, but we all know that we are mother, we are mother, we are mother, we are becoming mother over and over and over again. And the physiological, the psychological, the political, the social, the spiritual changes that we go through in this experience of motherhood, it's so big that we don't even have words to describe what's happening. Mm-hmm. And yet we think that we become mother at birth. Parenting a child who is about to leave the home or isn't ready to leave the home, but is supposed to leave the home, whatever, it's all weird now. Expectations. Going through menopause, we are different at every stage. And our child is different at every stage. And at every stage, we have to stand at that threshold again and go, wait, who am I? What do I believe? What do I not believe? Which direction am I going in? How do I appreciate this human in front of me? And how do I appreciate what I'm bringing to this story? I always think that if my child had met me 20 years later on my own evolution, I would be a very different parent than I was who I was then. That's part of my developing motherness, my matrescence.
I'm not even using this outline anymore. I am just completely lost in this in the most wonderful way. Okay, I need to make sure that we're covering the things we need to cover, because I will just talk to you for hours.
I'm off-roading too. I've got my little thing over here. So
off-roading, I love it. Okay, I'm going to use that again in the future. Okay, tools. Let's talk about tools. How can we use metaphor, image tending, art making, rituals, ceremony, and our relationship with the non-human world to help us prepare for, navigate, recover from, and integrate the emotionally challenging thresholds we encounter as parents? So we were just talking about how we move through those thresholds. And now I'm hoping to invite you to give us like some tangible tools to really help us mark those. As we're talking, I keep thinking of Women Who Run with Wool.
Clarissa.
Yeah. About her reference to, was it descansos? Like, she has this quote, and it's not coming to the forefront of my mind, about marking something in the earth, like staking something in the ground to mark something profound. And then you move on like with your journey, but that is still there. And that matters that it's still there. And yes, give us some tools. How can we do that for ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I think that the first is, and linking to what we were just talking about, like, if we have stepped away from religion and if we have stepped away from indigenous practices, we still have this need. So it's giving ourselves permission. And I was just talking with a friend in thinking about this topic, and she was saying, like, we just need to like trust our gut. But I heard her say, trust our guts. Like, we just need to trust our guts. Like, our guts say, wait, I need us to pause for a second. It's Thanksgiving. Before we sit down, can we just pause and look at each other for a second and just notice who's here and who's not here? Just even saying that, right? Something happens with us. So giving ourselves permission and then being vulnerable enough, I think, to celebrate fiercely and grieve fully. Because the marking in the sand is, this happened to me. I gave birth. I adopted. I weaned this child. I sent that child off to school. I kept them alive for 5 years and sent them off to kindergarten. Like, I did this. And they did this. My child was diagnosed with this disability, and we walked through that. We did that. When we don't mark those places in the sand, I'll get to the tools, but I just kind of want to keep going back to like the why. Like, if we don't mark it, life goes on, but the feelings are still there. The experience still needs to be metabolized.
It feels like an assault to me. Like I feel assaulted by the patriarchy anytime something like I move through something profound.
Yes.
And I do not claim the space to stake it to the earth. It feels like I am being forcibly rendered invisible. It feels like a violence, which sounds so extreme, but like really deeply. Like a lot of the work I do with people, in coaching, like through that therapy lens, is like going back to all of these moments that were so profound and like storying them with the gravity and honor that they deserved, like marking them, bearing witness to them, right? Like going back and doing this along the way. And it feels like a societal ailment that is not inherent in how we live, and relate with each other as a community.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you get to do that with people. I'm so glad that you get to help them go back and pick up the pieces. And it's the taking up space, right? We're so good at giving space and making space, but I am going to take this space. And it's not an accident that I say celebrating fiercely, because there is some growl that I have to access within me to say, stop. We are not just going to sit down and shove these mashed potatoes in our mouth. Stop. And I am going to tend to our spirits. And I'm going to tend to the story of what's happening here. Stop. It's your birthday. Yes. Cake, presents, everything's coming. For 17 years, this is what I've done at my daughter's birthday. Like, all right, we're doing this. And like, oh no, here goes Elena again. Like, everyone, come on, everyone, come and sit down. Come and sit down. Everyone knows. Like, I eventually learned to prep people. Like, this time we're going to gather, and I'd like you to think about this and bring something here. And kids, everybody, we sit down. And what does turning 9 mean to everyone in this room? Let's just pause for a second. What was 9 like for you? What was 9 like for you? What do you think 9's going to be like for you? Whoa. Suddenly, something different in the space. And that's the fierceness that we have to reclaim this part of us. And we can give it over, to your point, over and over, because, somebody rolls their eyes or somebody's not into it. And like, we let them dictate. And we become invisible to ourselves. We have to keep coming back. So how do we come back? I think this, the idea of journaling, I'll offer some journaling questions. I'll share those with you, and you can share it. I've been thinking about like, well, what do I do? And what do I offer people when I work with them? And, there's certain questions that can lead us to the story underneath the story. Like I asked my daughter, you're turning 17. What does 17 mean? And 17 means something different to her than I thought it would mean. Sort of the end. It's the beginning of the end of childhood, which I understand. But like carefreeness is about to be over. And there's some stuff we're going to have to take care of in there, right? That she's going to need to be held with and in as she goes through this year. So in journaling, figuring out what's the story underneath the story, asking our children, what does this mean to you? Whatever the event is. The weaning, the first tooth. I guess you can't really ask them what the first tooth is, but you're going to get a sense what that's like for them. Eating solid foods, riding in the front, getting to ride in the front seat. Whoa, all big moments for them. I think, the one thing that I just feel, the power of symbolism, being willing. And when I say the non-human world, right, we can talk about nature and my relationship with the trees right outside my door, my relationship with the animal world. And there are objects. I'm looking around my space, the objects that are infused with symbolism for me that remind me of my way. I'll tell you a quick story about that. It has to do with sort of this idea of maybe how we know when we need to pause, because we might not even know. For some of us, we know and we silence it. And some of us, like, I'm not sure. A lot of times parents will talk about bittersweet moments that are bittersweet. And I was working with a friend of mine, and we were having conversation about when she gave away her stroller, her double wide bob jogger.
Yep. I remember that moment.
Yes, you do, right? And how it was, nobody thought it was a big deal. She was just getting rid of it, and she just it brought tears to her eyes. Then she was really having a hard time getting rid of it. And 10 years later, talking about it, it's still. And as we began to work with the image of the stroller, what the stroller meant was the thing that needed to be tended. And so when I talk about image tending, this stroller through our work became a symbol of freedom and connection and her children's wonder and the fear that the wonder would be gone. And now she's parenting a teen, a preteen, and like, oh, she doesn't even want to hold my hand anymore. And so remembering those moments when I was wanted and when I had complete connection. This stroller now symbolized that and could tie her back to a time when she felt that with her child and bring that forward into her current relationship. And so we talked about like, well, if you could time travel, what would you do? Like, could you lovingly clean the stroller? Could you talk to the stroller? I mean, someone might think you're crazy, but for yourself, you are metabolizing.
Yeah.
Right? Metabolizing is the extraction of celebration and the processing of grief. So journaling, paying attention to symbolism, and then finding a little way. Maybe it's with somebody else. Like my thing is always like, find someone else, right? Find someone else to tell, like, I can't give away my stroller. Would you just sit with me while I clean the stroller?
Yes, witness, the power of witnessing. Yes.
Would you be willing to just witness as I say goodbye? I know it may not seem like a big deal. That's talk about the antidote to invisibility. We get to show ourselves to ourselves, and we get to show ourselves to someone else.
Yes. So many things come up for me while you're talking. Like I do a lot of work around minimalism.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about how like a lot of that work too is about like, these objects are the symbols for the things that we didn't honor and acknowledge, and how going back in and bearing witness for someone, can allow them to complete that like grief cycle, like complete that metabolization and let the object go because it's now been the experience, the weight of it, the significance of it has been like integrated. And how it's just so funny how those deeper things connect to things that seem so superficial from the outside.
Totally. And here we are. We're like, oh my gosh, maybe I have not a lot of big feelings about graduation or promotions, but giving the stroller away just wrecked me. How cool to just pause long enough and give ourselves permission to recognize that.
Yes. Okay. You mentioned birthdays.
Yeah.
You note that they are prime invitations to look back and look forward so we can calibrate toward needs and roles. What might that look like?
Yeah. Well, this is an opportune time as my child is having her birthday this weekend. And just thinking about what our roles are, first of all, I like to think about our roles as parents as being we need to be our child's appreciator, we need to be their anchor, their protector, and their guide. How we do all of those things changes as they age. But the fact that they need us to be each of those roles doesn't change. So, thinking about my own feelings about whatever age is, like what was my life like when I was 17? That's here in the room with us right now. 17-year-old Magdalena is here. And she shows up every Friday night as we talk about where you going, what's good. It shows
Powerful.
up when we talk about, romantic relationships and friendships, like she's here. So I have a very strong desire to start a movement that parents have structures for using birthdays as a time to calibrate. And what are we calibrating? We're calibrating our ability. I'm calibrating my ability to be her appreciator, to remember her goodness, to remember her wisdom, to trust her instincts. I'm calibrating towards being her anchor as things get crazy. I'm going to do the emotional labor to be regulated so that I can help to continue to regulate her. I'm going to do that calibration towards protecting. What limits do I need to set now? Where do I need to back off? It's hard to know when I'm thinking of the way, like when I'm so inextricably tied and tangled to what my experience is like, it can get really muddy. Mm-hmm. And where do I want to go with her? What are my intentions? What's my purpose with her? Where am I guiding her towards? What's my influence? So I just knew that I needed to do something for her birthday. I knew I needed this moment. I needed to process my experience of becoming a mother, especially with having had losses before. And then I needed to calibrate towards, well, what does a 1-year-old need from me? I've never been a mother to a 1-year-old before. And those were the times when I asked myself, how do I anchor? How do I appreciate? How do I protect? How do I guide? And I gathered people and we read poetry and we sang songs and we danced. And I could once again kind of like, I think we have our anniversaries with our partners. Every year on our wedding, we do something. Me and my partner do something. But every year on many children's birthdays, it's about the child birthday doing this thing. Where's the time when we can talk about our relationship, where we tend to our connection, whether explicitly with them or me on my own calibrating towards where I want to go?
Yes. And so typically, like each time our child turns a new age, our inner child from that age shows up with a new invitation for healing that we couldn't access previously. Our child turning a new number, like that actual day, all of a sudden, if your child is turning 12, all of a sudden 12-year-old Rachel is like, it's like that level is like unlocked within you. And so even taking a minute to sit with your inner child at that new age and get to know her and be non-judgmentally curious about what her unmet needs were and, what she needs, what she's ready to have witnessed, now that you're able to see her as a 12-year-old, which until your child turns 12 is really hard to do. Like having a child outside of your body who is 12 really unlocks that connection with your inner 12-year-old. So I find that that's like a really, like my child's birthday is a really nice, like integrating that into everything you're talking about feels really seamless and connected.
Yeah, yeah. Well, last year for her 16th birthday, when the friends and family that we invited, we asked everyone to contribute a song to the
Mhm.
playlist from when they were 16.
Oh, that's so cool.
And it was so fun because, and this ties in, we might talk a little bit more about teenagers later, but I'll just jump in since we're both talking
Yeah.
about teens. That when I can touch back, like Dan Siegel in Brainstorm talks about the power of adolescence, and that if we as adults can bring forward all of that deliciousness from adolescence, the novelty seeking, the sensory seeking. I have a sticky note that I keep here just to remember it as I'm interacting with her, right? The increased emotional intensity, the creative exploration, that if more adults hung on to those things, we wouldn't get to middle-aged completely burned out.
Mm.
So these people coming to this party as their 16-year-old selves and celebrating gave the teens and her a legacy point. Like, we were all your age. We can continue to be your resources because we know what it was like to be living that age.
That is
So
beautiful.
it was so fun and so delicious. And plus, we got a lot of awesome music from the 90s and the 80s and some 70s and 60s and 50s and 40s.
Icing on the cake. For my birthday every year, I engage in a new experience. Like, that's like my tradition. So I go somewhere I've never been, or I do something I've never done. This year I trekked with llamas on this rad woman owned and operated alpaca and llama farm, and it was so fun. And my family came with me, and it was awesome hiking through the forest with our llamas. It was fantastic. And then our kids, we invite them to choose an experience for their birthday. That sort of came out of when they were younger and seeing all of the kids' birthday parties. And certainly we've thrown parties and it's been lovely and super fun. But sort of like you were talking about with the wedding thing, it's a lot of times children's birthdays are a lot of money and a lot of flashy things, but not really a lot of substance. So we always invite them to choose an experience for their birthday. Now, as a 7-year-old or a 13-year-old, what do you feel ready for that you weren't ready for before? What do you want where do you want to stretch into that you weren't ready to when you were 12 or when you were 17? And that has always felt really meaningful for me. And then it makes for a really cool, the memories are more cemented, because your birthday is connected to this cool experience that you did, this new thing that you engaged in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it shakes out and makes visible, sort of going back, it makes the invisible of who we are. I love that you talked about capacity. What are you ready for now that you weren't ready before? And suddenly we and they get to stand back from themselves and go, oh my gosh, I used to be afraid of ... and I'm not anymore. Wow, look at that growth mindset in action.
Yeah.
The depth of that, and that can keep reminding us they are capable, they are wise, they have intelligence, and I can trust in development, which is so helpful as we keep trying to over and over, as we cross all these thresholds with our children, we can lose our footing in trusting them and trusting ourselves. So then to have this ritual that you have every year of all right, let's blow the lid off. What are we doing? Beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's meet the new layer of you.
Love it.
Okay. Let's talk about birth. The transition into motherhood, which we talked about as matrescence, is a monumental experience. And many women carry emotional tension forward with them from it. How can we use ritual, ceremony, all of that to heal and honor our own matrescence?
Yeah, yeah. There really is a lot of need in that spot.
Yeah.
Based on the expectations that society places on us, that first of all, that birth is going to be very easy and that birth is going to be empowering. and we have maybe experiences that feel otherwise. And then we think we're supposed to love and feel incredible attachment to this thing in the moment. And all of that has to be negotiated and looked at again. And so many mothers that I work with, especially mothers of teens and older children, when we begin to talk about their relationship and their connection, many times they'll say, from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
From the beginning, it was hard. From the beginning, I wasn't enough.
Mm.
So that is the first frontier, I think, in terms of ceremony and ritual. And when we think about like that first birthday, and that's where the birthdays for me in honoring my child is going back and remembering and feeling into the sacredness of my experience. And also, once again, healing any shards that are left over of the difficulty that I experienced. I had a difficult postpartum experience, and there's that doesn't go away. The limiting self-beliefs that we might have about ourselves, it doesn't just like we think, oh, it's that was a long time ago. Oh, they're like splinters. They're in there. So something that I feel very strongly about at supporting parents is in doing birth story listening sessions where parents will have an opportunity to tell their story. And I was trained by Pam England, who founded Birthing from Within and then Birth Story Medicine. Let's go back and tell this story in a very structured way. Let's find where those shards are, and then let's find your unique medicine. And with that unique medicine comes a lot of times a symbol or an image that either needs to be released and put to rest. And typically it's a belief about themselves that needs to be surrendered. And then there's this wisdom, the resources, the strength that was found as we dug through, oh, here it is, look at you. And oftentimes then drawing, writing, creating something that then can be burned or put into the waves or shared in some way with a candle, with some tea, with some dancing, can make a really big difference. And many people, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, many people who are struggling with having had a very challenging or emotionally distressing pregnancy or birth or postpartum time have maybe seen lots of therapists, but the talking is awesome, but it doesn't necessarily get down to the spirit tending.
Yes.
That lighting a candle, having some objects that represent different elements of us that can bring us power and give us forgiveness, that something like that can do. It's surprising what a symbolic gesture. And I also think about ceremony or ritual being embodied storytelling. If we were to like take those other words away and just like, what is it that we're doing? We're telling these stories in an embodied way.
Yeah. It's powerful to have something tangible that you can touch and move and smell and see, even just writing a thought down on a piece of paper takes it from this like nebulous, hazy plane into like reality where I can touch it and hold it and see it and burn it or paint it or transform it in some meaningful way. It's powerful.
It is really powerful. I have a story that just came to mind in a mom that I worked with, and she talked about how her postpartum time was really difficult. And I'm sure many listeners might relate that postpartum time, like feeling like you're slipping on ice, you can never get your sea legs, and just feeling so lost. And she talked about how she would sit in this dark room with her baby trying to nurse, and nursing wasn't going well. And she was in a lot of pain and the baby was crying all the time. And she would sit in this dark room trying to nurse. And there was a nightlight. And the nightlight was a LED polar bear. And in our session, she was really having a lot of feelings about how lost she felt and lots of judgment about feeling so lost at that time. And her child is now, or was at the time, like 7. But as we began to work, she started to tune in her memory to the polar bear, the nightlight, and it began to represent the moments that she did know what to do, that she did know how to respond to the cries, that nursing did go well because it wasn't 100% wrong.
Yeah.
And this nightlight then was a beacon for her to realize that she is capable. She was capable then, and now, as her child was encountering difficulties at school, as she forgot, once again, she got lost. It felt very similar to that time, like, oh, wait, where's the light? And the polar bear nightlight became something that she would have around. And when she needed to calibrate again towards her power, her perspective, and her purpose, she could look at that light. And she told me just the other day, her daughter went for her first sleepover. And her daughter was afraid and wasn't sure that she wanted to go. And the mom said, would you like to take the polar bear? And so that polar bear then sat at this sleepover with this daughter. And the polar bear it's not just that it emits light. It is mom. It is mom's love. It is mom's capacity, mom's appreciation, mom's protection. And so the lineage of what happens when we heal and metabolize, I'm going to use that word again, when we can metabolize and chew on what our experience was in birth, it can have long-lasting effects on our self-image, which then impacts our relationship with our child.
Yes. And I want to keep moving this forward. So we're talking about like birth, then her daughter was 7 and how that evolves. And I want to keep moving that forward and go back into the teenager space a little bit. You talk about the ongoing work of blessing and releasing our children. And that language resonates with me so deeply, having teenagers myself. This season of development seems to crave even more social ceremony as like they seek to be recognized as independent individuals in their communities. What have you witnessed as being particularly relevant for this season of development? Help us bless and release.
Yes. Well, yeah, this is where I'll keep centering us on we need to have time, symbolic opportunities, ceremony, ritual for us as parents. To me, that is first and foremost as parents of teens. I'm going to use the word getting purposefully, but getting kids to participate in rites of passage ceremonies. I've had parents come to me before wanting something for their child, but because they don't have a tradition of that suddenly at 13, you're going to do something. The kids are like, no way.
What are you doing, weirdo?
What are you doing? So I would say for any parents who are listening, who have young ones, like beginning to put things in when they're young, sort of primes the pump and establishes a sense of this is how we do things. But what do teens need from us? They need us to know that we believe in them. We believe in their capacities. They need to have opportunities to be useful, and they need ties to legacy. They are not the first and they are not the last. We get to keep them grounded here. One thing that was powerful when I did do a coming of age ceremony for a mother and her 13-year-old boy, one thing that stood out for them was this moment where I was trying to connect him and his family tribe And again, helping him see you are 13. Every single person here was once 13 too.
Mm.
And they have something to offer you. And as you age, you have belonging here. And there was a moment when I gave him a bag and everyone had these big rocks. And he went through the circle and people put in rocks into his bag because life is full of challenge. And they talked about the things, the challenges that they've encountered. And at the end, his bag was really heavy. On his second pass through the circle, they talked about how they overcame those challenges and what they learned as a result. And they took the rock back out and said, I'm here for you if you ever experience something like that.
Mm.
So the idea of belongingness, of not being alone, and that you will encounter challenge, but you do have capacity to overcome it. That was very powerful for that young child. Something similar could be done. That was a very formal something, but something could be done in very small ways in families when we tune into what it means to them. What does 17 mean? Right? And if I can get clear and clean about what my part is in this, we talked about my 17-year-old self is coming out. If I can get clear for that, then what to do with my child, it will get clearer to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, I've been working really hard on this new Sage Mothering course. And I was just the other day, writing this section about teenagers. And I was talking about how I will often physically open my hands, as this symbol of the bless and release, right? The letting go, the acceptance. But there's this open-handed posture. It's we can't, when we start to clench and to cling, our fists get closed and they get tighter. And that always creates more dissonance and more conflict. And so sometimes that I'll even just physically open my hands and it just, okay, we're letting go, we're releasing, we're letting go. That's been a powerful symbol, I guess, for me, or even ritual.
Well, it's an action. I mean, this is the symbolic action that you're talking about, which is another element. Yeah, for me, anything that starts to taste and smell like urgency, which happens all along the spectrum as our kids are growing, right? Anytime I'm she has to stop this now. They have to stop this now. They have to, stop. And then you must slow your steps down, slow, or she just said something. I need to count to 10 before I respond. Just wait. Because, sometimes we get into rapid fire questions and then what? Yeah. And then what do they say? And now I'm Larry Cohen, who wrote Playful Parenting. He talks about interviewing for pain. When I begin interviewing for pain, I know I'm in trouble. But, actually, this morning, because my daughter's birthday is this weekend, this morning I actually had my own ceremony exactly for this, in the spirit of what you're talking about. Because at this point, as she worries about, as many, juniors in high school begin, oh my gosh, what am I going to do after high school? What's going to happen? Am I going to make it? Am I going to be okay? And it's very easy for parents to start to get really afraid and start joining in or adding more pressure into the mix. My job now is to remember her capacity. And I feel like I continue to say that over and over because that's the place that I'm in. And so I actually have have it here. And I don't know if you'll see it, but I have a little picture of her. It's her going for this soccer ball.
So cute.
Because that was her driven, motivated. And that's the fear with a lot of times with our teens is like, oh my gosh, especially if you don't have the valedictorian, you're like, oh my God, are they going to survive? Are they going to be able to feed themselves? Like, oh, so let me ride them harder.
Yeah.
When I can get back and calibrate towards that little girl who she always was, then I can continue holding that vision for her, for herself.
Yeah.
And so my ceremony this morning was going to a garden close by that I really, really love, and being among the birds and the bushes and the trees and the dirt. And I walked circles every time for thinking about legacy, for my great grandma, for my grandma, for my mother, for me. And this idea of carefree and responsibility. And how can I hold both of those for her? What pain points might I still have about my own lack of carefreeness and my own worries about my own responsibleness, and holding that vision for her over and over and over again as I walked and thanked and thought.
Yes. And that, like, unconditional love is radical acceptance. Like, they were born the exact human that they are, and nothing that I could ever say or do would change that. So my role is not to create a person. Like, they are their own given spirit and their own free will. Like, they get to do that. That's theirs to own. So what is my role? Like, my role is to love them unconditionally, be a safe harbor, a soft place for them to land, to, like a foreign exchange student who was visiting, I can point out like potential hazards that they may not be aware of. But like, our role is so much more limited in terms of control than we believe it is. And often, like, through like ritual or through milestones, through transitions, like, I tend to remind myself of that. Like, that feels like an important part of that for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then as we do that, then we're much more equipped to help them. Right. And we can do that with specific strategies, with making sure we have special time with them, being able to listen to their tantrums and their tears, right? Setting all of that up and making sure that we get support for ourselves. We can keep remembering all of those that we don't have to white knuckle it for them.
Yeah.
Or with them.
Yeah. There's less fear when we are released to just be in connection with, as opposed to, create. Like, it's a co-creation. We're not creating them anymore. Like, we did our part in that. And now we just get to be in connection with them, like, to be calibrated for that, to that being the gift. Is helpful. Okay. I want to ask you about holidays. I know we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
So for families out there hoping for some inspiration, what are the most meaningful holiday rituals that you have witnessed?
Yeah, holidays. Yeah, there's so many different ways to celebrate, right? And I have some things that I pulled out in thinking about that. But I think the first one is, again, like my friend who at Thanksgiving was just like, stop. Like, we're gonna look at each other. We're just gonna arrive here together. Other ones are the food, right? Like, actually connecting to the food and the legacy of the food and the curiosity that might come from the food. We're going to go shopping together. We're going to go to this place together. We're going to go to this particular market because that's the place where I used to shop. I used to shop and eat foods like this. And we don't typically eat foods like that. But when you come with me, you get a sense for what my life was like, and you get connected to a culture that's broader and beyond where you're at. Something that I experimented with when I was homeschooling my daughter, and we took our adventure out on the road, and we were world schooling for a year, and my parents joined us at different legs of the journey. And I knew it was going to be very hard for them to leave because they were having such a good time. And so I thought about, well, how can we capture what our experiences were? And so I got wire, and we went to a bead store and got pretty beads. And we told the story of our experiences with this wire and this bead. I'm going to tie it to holidays in a minute. And so like something like, this each bead was a moment in our journey, and it tells us a particular story. And I began to think about, well, what about New Year's? Like this time when we're going to make resolutions. We have some feeling that it's the beginning of the year. What could we do with our families? And now what I do is this story gathering where we get to reflect on the year together. What was a celebration? What was hard? What are you looking forward to? Exactly your question of who was I at the beginning and who am I now? So noticing growth. And everybody gets wire and everyone gets beads and gets to have this moment of noticing each other, of the invisible becoming visible, and then setting intentions for the year to come. So how we actually bring I transition off that. We light a candle during that time. We put some music on. We have something beautiful to eat. We have something beautiful to smell. And it all those devices, again, those are the devices of ritual. And then this time and space of this ceremony gets us together. And if the story underneath the story is belonging and noticing each other and making the invisible visible, then all of that will help us to do that.
Yes. So many beautiful ideas there. My favorite one that I was introduced to maybe a decade ago, not quite a decade ago, by a really good friend invited me to her winter spiral. And it was just delicious. And to this day, it's still my favorite, like winter time tradition. She creates this like labyrinth of evergreens and candles all the way. And you spiral into the center, thinking about something you're ready to release from the previous year. And then you light your candle from the flame at the center and you walk back out thinking about something you want to invite in. I love like ceremonies that incorporate that like self-reflection. Like we talked about, like how important it is to have those invitations to look inward and to acknowledge things and to be curious about things and to story things like that is like, if we do that all along, that feels like that's the way it's supposed to be. Like that's how our minds are wired to thrive and be healthy and well and happy is to be doing that all along, as opposed to just everything's an emergency and charging forward and getting sucked into the current and then dealing with the ailments, the symptoms that pop up as a result of that mindlessness, like really being mindful, really being conscious. And these ceremonies, these rituals can be those invitation points to like do that work all along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, we are meaning makers. We are meaning makers. And I heard this great quote. I don't know who it was from, but that, where, I think it was an Aboriginal idea that we need to pause long enough so our soul will catch up with us.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're moving so fast. Like, what does this mean? What does this mean to us? Let's stop and dig in and digest and resource up so we can go back out. And that's what these moments are.
It's beautiful. Okay. The show notes can be found at sagefamily.com/podcast95, where you can also subscribe and get future show notes sent right to your inbox. What, Magdalena, are your favorite resources for people to dive deeper into this topic?
So great. I'm so glad you asked. So based on what we just talked about, I have a book and I'm just going to show it to you because I just love this book so much. It's called I'm in Charge of Celebrations. It's a children's book by Bird Baylor, and talk about permission, just giving permission to do celebrations in our way, whatever way that looks. So I love that. I also, as I mentioned, birth story listening and birth story medicine. That's something very near and dear to my heart. So you can check that out. I am a hand-in-hand parenting instructor and thinking about helping parents and children grieve and celebrate. And those strategies are very helpful there. And I'll have my website there, and I'm putting together some of what we talked about, some of the journaling questions and some videos of me working with parents around some of these symbols. So I'll share that.
Yes. Okay. And your website is circlesandbridges.com, right? That's where people can go if they just want to connect with you.
Yeah.
They don't even have anything specific they're looking for. They just need some Magdalena energy in their soul. They can head over to circleandbridges.com, right?
Yes, Circles and Bridges. I love meeting people. I love supporting and walking along with parents as they cross all of these thresholds.
Excellent. And I'll include the link to the matrescence, like sort of source website too, so if that concept resonated with people, they can dive deeper into that. I also wanted to include a link to Braiding Sweetgrass, which is just my favorite book. And Robin Wall Kimmerer it's not even like she specifically talks about ceremony in that book necessarily, but every time I read that book, I love listening to the audiobook. I just like connection to that non-human world. It just gets my soul like moving in that direction and opens it, I guess, to create more space and invite more of that in. So I'm going to include a link to that in the show notes as well.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that she'll be there with all the rest of it.
Thank you so deeply, very much, Magdalena. This conversation was so nurturing for my soul. It's funny, one of my villagers, my like community members and client friends, just out of the blue messaged me and said, I heard this woman talk at a summit, and the whole time she was talking, I just knew you needed to talk to her. And I am so grateful that she made that connection and that we got to connect here today. And I sincerely hope that we're able to continue nourishing this, because I'd love to stay in touch and keep supporting your work and keep you in the hearts and minds of my audience as well. So thank you.
Oh, so great, Rachel. Thank you for having me here. And thank you to your friend who listened and connected us. This is what it's all about. So blessings to everyone.